We sort of thought this was maybe an older, lonely man with a lot of health problems.
David was honing in on his prey. Along with the regular searches of businesses in Lilburn, Georgia, a lot of searches also revolved around the surname Arnold.
I went onto an online phone book and looked up people with that name. There were 11 of them. One of them lived on Shadow Lake, and I went back and looked in the search queries. It said Shadow Lake subdivision, Gwinnett County, Georgia. I said, you know, that's got to be the person.
After just a few hours' work and using nothing other than the searches and the telephone directory, David had identified his target. She was a 62-year-old woman called Thelma Arnold.
She was pretty shocked and angry about this. She said, you know, I had no idea someone was looking over my shoulder. You know, this is like my whole life is on here.
Thelma explained that many of the searches for medical information were not for her, but for her friends who didn't have access to the internet.
People are just typing in questions that they would probably never ask another human being, and yet, you know, here they are at their computer, and they think that the internet is the source of all knowledge, and they have no idea that anyone is recording this stuff that they're searching for.
Think back to the search terms that you've stuck into the search engines over the past week or so. It's likely that you can't remember most of them. But as the AOL story shows us, it's these incidentals that, when pieced together, can give us a surprisingly revealing picture about who we are.
There are so many things that people do on the web now which are very, very intimate. In a way, if you know what somebody's browsing on the web, you find out whether somebody is gay and wondering about coming out, looking at other people's stories. Somebody belongs to a religion that really is very different from the one around them. There are all kinds of very, very sensitive things that people do on the web.
This massive ability to communicate with other people all over the world, this massive ability to access all kinds of information and services and so on, all of that positivity has a dark side. And the darker side of the web, to some extent, includes the ability of those behind the screen, those who are providing this space for you to monitor you.
The average person seems very pragmatic about it. As long as it works, and as long as all the laws are followed, they seem perfectly happy to share personal information to make their experience better.
Eric Schmidt is right. We consumers of the web voted with our feet. We're complicit in the deal for free. Our complacency is illustrated by a little-known but quite revealing slice of web history. In 2005, a non-profit organization called the Attention Trust tried to reassert our ownership of data that we put on the web. It sounds like a no-brainer, doesn't it? The kind of thing that would be taken up by millions. I went to meet one of the founders, Seth Goldstein, to find out what happened.
There's all this attention data that we're producing now online. We're spending more and more of our time online. We're spending more of our time doing social things, online. How can we claim ownership of it?
So they created a piece of software that anyone could download and plug into their web browser that would automatically store a record of our activity on the web. Crucially, we own this record, not the Attention Trust and not Google or anyone else, and only we could exchange it with others on our terms. The result? Well, very few took up the technology. Attention Trust failed.
Do you think that we're perfectly happy in this trade that we're engaged in?
I don't think people know how they feel about it. So when you say perfectly happy, it's like, well, they've looked at all the alternatives and like, no, I'm happy. I think if you say they're perfectly dumb about it, dumb and happy, or sort of happy and naive, yeah, that's probably more like it. It's just not that important to them right now. There's no clear cost.
Are we simply sleepwalking into surveillance rather than thinking about the amount of information we give up on the web and how that might come back to us later?
There are a lot of sort of social critics who say this is exactly how you devolve into, a fascist state or a socialist state or a dictatorship, which is you invite it in and ignore the consequences, and all of a sudden it's 1984, you know? And I think there's some merit in that.
An Orwellian future may seem a little far-fetched, but as masses of data about us is stored up on the web, the issue isn't so much who owns the data as who might own it in an unknown future. Dana Boyd is a sociologist at Harvard University who believes there are lessons from history in how data collected today can have unintended consequences tomorrow.
There's been times in history where we've collected mass amounts of data without even thinking about how it would get used in the future, often for really good intentions. A good example of that is in the early 1900s, the Netherlands started collecting all sorts of information about its citizens for the best of intentions. One of the bits of data they collected during that period was people's religion in order to give people a proper burial. They had no idea that in 1939, when the Nazis invaded the Netherlands, that data would be used for how it was used. We have companies collecting massive amounts of data about citizens. People don't have an imagination of what it means to aggregate all of that data going forward. They have these expectations of what possible terrible things can be done with these huge digital dossiers. Frankly, most companies aren't quite sure what to do with them yet. The companies are still trying to work it out, which is why they're collecting all of this data. And they're not quite sure where it's going.
But perhaps just as troubling as these huge automated databases are the databases we freely add intimate information to ourselves. The great wave of web innovation since Google has been in social media, networking through video, microblogs, and sites like Facebook and MySpace. Young people have pioneered this revolution, and Dana Boyd is studying how they feel about living in an online commercial space.
There's so much data being collected about us online. Do you think that kids are complicit with this? Do you think that they know what's going on? Or do you think that they're naive about what's going to happen with their data trail?
The irony is that young people actually understand the corporation advertising trade-off better than they understand the long-term implications of that data and information. So one of the things you'll hear from young people is they'll say, well, if it gives me ads, that means it'll be free. And, I'd rather it be free. And part of it is they've never known a non-commercial world. Advertising is pervasive in their lives.
The generation growing up with the web may be embracing commercial reality in return for free convenience. But aren't they missing out on what the old web once promised?
What we've done is limited the range of human expression and activity on the internet to those things that are market friendly. Look at the devolution of people's personal presence online from the quirky, individualistic, highly personalized websites, the home pages of the HTML mid-90s, to the now utterly conformist and rigid profiles on something like MySpace and Facebook. You can no longer define yourself by anything. You must define yourself by what books you buy, by what movies you like, by what actresses you aspire to, by whether you are single, married, or looking. By things that the market understands.
But the problems facing the younger generation run deeper still. I'm concerned that there's little understanding of one of the fundamentals of digital information. Once it's on the web, it's almost impossible to erase.
All of our interactions on the web, from our Facebook and Twitter status updates, to news that we share with family and friends, to gossip that's spread about us, will be online forever. The web effectively makes us immortal. The upside is that we can live on. There are thousands of dead people who are still receiving updates and even being poked on Facebook. But the downside is that young people who are growing up in public by living so much of their lives on the web will have to face living with all of their youthful indiscretions that can now be accessed by anyone. Future bosses, future partners, future friends. And that's for the rest of their lives.
The fact that you are just a regular person does not entitle you to any guarantee that pictures of you drunk and passed out are not going to be spread across the internet. And so in a sense, we all have to live like celebrities because there's that potential that we'll be treated like them.
One of the biggest threats comes from consumers themselves. Young people in particular who are having, no doubt, wonderful fun on social networking sites, meeting lots of people, but forgetting the permanency of that kind of engagement.
If people consider companies holding their DNA fingerprint, they somehow get a lot more emotionally disturbed by the thought that decisions might be taken about insurance, healthcare provision, lifestyle on the basis of that genetic fingerprint. The digital fingerprint is every bit as valuable.
Do you really want these intimate details about yourself to be available to so many people? And will you feel the same way about what you did last night, not just in the morning, but 40 years later?
We have seen how we are all trading a little bit of our privacy each time we search and network online. In return for a free web, our privacy has become a commodity. We are economic units in what has become the new commercial frontier. We've entered this deal in many cases unwittingly, perhaps because a deal just isn't the experience that we think we're having on the web. On a computer at home or commuting with our mobile while traveling, we feel we're in a closed, private bubble. But the reality of the web's open networks is that we are in effect always public. What we do on our computers has the potential to be seen, analyzed, and used by others all around the world.
The web disrupts our sense of public and private space. We're not just transacting with one computer. We're actually having a conversation with a multitude of computers across the globe, and we're being watched. That is what makes this such a revolution and the dawn of a new era.
Some genies, when they're let out of a bottle, can cause problems, and they certainly can't ever go back in the bottle. When cars first arose, people were horrified at the deaths on the road. Horrified. They couldn't believe it. I mean, there were hundreds of people being squelched every day. It was grotesque. And if you just braked in a car at 30 miles an hour, you'd kill yourself on the steering wheel, you'd break your neck. People were dying all the time. Did they say, oh, that's it then? We can't have cars. Sorry. In the same way as if someone says, actually, these mobile phones do give out microwaves, and they will give you brain cancer. Are we going to say, oh, well, that's the end of that technology then? Not on your Nelly. There's a risk-reward ratio here, and for us, the reward is so great that whatever the risk is, we try and contain it and understand it.
I don't like this extremist view that the web is suddenly a danger zone where unpleasant people can more easily find their vulnerable targets. That's the extremities, as it always has been in every society, and as long as you educate to make people safe, I think the bulk of what happens in the web is interesting, exciting, supportive, fun, entertaining, and magic.
Paradoxically, what makes us exposed as never before is also what makes the web such a magical opportunity to share, roam, and nose around in the riches of human knowledge. But as commerce comes to dominate the web, I believe we must wake up and understand the true cost of free, how it's redefining privacy, personal space, and perhaps ultimately, who we are.
捐款赞助公示，公示给你多元观点。
大家好，现在为大家报告第13号台风